Mayor, we're good to go.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I'd like to welcome everyone to our fourth and final boundary review meeting. John, welcome, and I guess staff Olivia's here. Is anyone else tonight?
That's it from our end, Mr. Mayor.
All right, and I'd like to welcome everyone that's participating in this, as well as counselors that are here tonight. John, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and get my screen loaded there. I'm hoping you're seeing a document called Council Structure and Ward Boundary Review. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I particularly want to thank the members of council who have sat through some of this presentation several times and certainly deserve great respect for having the courage to do so again. I'd also thank, I see a couple of members of the public who have come out for a second time. So repeat business is always extremely welcome. And we're certainly looking forward to hearing your input as well. It's kind of encouraging to see light still coming in the window at this time of day. When we started these meetings, it was already very dark. In the same way that there's light outside right now, there's sort of light at the tunnel of for this process, in the sense that we are kind of coming towards the end of the second phase of consultation. I'll just give you a bit of an idea of the agenda for tonight. I'll give you a very brief background on the council structure and ward boundary review and where we're at right now. A bit of a refresher on effective representation, although I'm tempted to make council give the presentation. They've heard it so many times. An overview of the current wards and the populations and the projected populations. And then what you're really here to hear about, which is how the draft ward boundary options fit with the various council structure options that are still on the table. And then we'll talk a bit how best to provide your feedback. I think you're probably all very familiar with the Zoom format. Do try to remember to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. We'll certainly mute you if you forget, but we'll also be very happy to unmute you as soon as you are ready to speak and don't have a dog barking behind you or whatever, because really, I think everyone is here tonight to hear you, much more so than me. And so you can also add questions through the chat box. I think we had 11 members of the public signed up tonight. That is enough to have a very interactive session. I'm not sure they're all here yet, or perhaps some of them have been waylaid by the various things that can affect life. But if I'll certainly encourage any members of the public who find it convenient to do so, to have their camera on, because it makes it a lot easier for me to see you and know if you want to say something. But if that's inconvenient, or if like a certain member of parliament, you just came in from a jog and it's not appropriate to turn on your camera, then whatever the case, do what makes sense for you. But certainly from the point of view of the session, it would work best to, if you're comfortable turning on your camera. But we'll leave that to your discretion. And the only other comment that I'd make is, as facilitator, it's my role to try and create a comfortable and safe place for everybody to make their comments. I know everybody who's here is here to add great comments to an important process. So frankly, every one of these meetings we've had so far has been extraordinarily enjoyable, and I'm not expecting anything different tonight. But it's very important that we maintain the decorum of the meeting as a safe place for everybody to participate in a way that lets us hear their ideas and doesn't get into crosstalk or things that get in the way of the consultation. So I'll look forward to your collaboration on that. But like I said, I'm not expecting anything very challenging. Just to give you an idea on what we have ahead, we'll be showing you each of the various ward options, and you'll get more than one chance to talk. It's not going to be like a traditional public meeting where you might have to wait in line and get one chance to say your piece and be playing beat the clock. The idea is to kind of go back and forth a little bit and test the options, because at this stage, everything is just an option. And I can't underscore that enough. We're not here tonight to flog or sell a particular option or to push it. What they all represent is different sort of strategic approaches to the problem, there isn't one of them that couldn't be improved. And I just want to make it absolutely clear, you don't have to frame any of your comments as criticisms, because anything that you say about them, we would view as constructive. Because as I say, we've tried to go from nothing to something, and the idea is to hear from you how to make them better, whatever they may be. So all of your input is extraordinarily welcome tonight, and I just want you to know that's the way we'll take it. We're not here to defend anything or push anything. We're here to find out how we can make it better. So thank you again. So just a quick bit of background on the ward boundary review. The purpose for the review is to make sure that the ward boundaries reflect the principles of effective representation. And this isn't just a ward boundary review, it's also a council structure review. As you may be aware, there hasn't been such a review for 27 years. So ward boundaries, they often become, they often make sense when they're drawn, but they sometimes reflect where the population was at the time when they were drawn. And in 27 years, anyone who lives in Grimsby understands the significant amount of growth that the community's experienced. And so sometimes that growth isn't evenly distributed amongst the wards, and that's why they can be thrown out of balance by growth over time. So the object of the review is to ensure that the ward boundaries do reflect an appropriate balance and can deliver effective representation for all the residents. And the terms of reference dictate that we're supposed to consider a 10-year period, and that's very common for municipal ward boundary reviews. It's understood that it's challenging enough to know the exact population today, and it's reasonable enough to try to forecast it out for 10 years. But beyond that, the limitations of forecasting are what they are. And so that's why the period is meant to cover the next 10 years. So the review process, you can see it kind of outlined on the right, and I won't read it at you because you can read faster than I can talk. But ultimately, the decision to implement any new boundaries will be a decision of council. It's expected that this process will be completed by June of 2021, and that council will have made whatever decision it may make by that time. And that would be in time for the rules to be in place for the new wards and the new council structure for the 2022 election. And you can find information and updates, as you probably found out about tonight, but this may be also a benefit for folks who are watching at home, on the Let's Talk Grimsby project site and also at grimsby.ca. So tonight we're in public consultation round 2. When we're done, we'll be taking all of this that we've heard and heading off to produce a final report, which we'll then present to council, and then council will be able to decide based on that which way they think is best to go. There was already a significant amount of feedback from the first round of consultations, and I see some folks on the screen tonight who contributed to that, and I say thanks for that again. There's a over 40-page report that we did for the first phase that summarizes that extensively. We heard lots of different things. There's a few sample comments that are reflected here, but I would urge you to go take a look at the report and see what it says if you're interested in the process, obviously, by virtue of the fact that you're either here or watching this online. There's certainly a lot more information than I'll cover right now about the basics and how we've gotten as far as we have. But probably the most important part of that information is the record of the consultation so far. And we just urge you to stay involved. The process isn't over until it's over. And so there'll be lots more to learn with the new report coming out in the next few weeks. Just a quick backgrounder or primer on the concept of effective representation. You've heard me mention it a couple of times already. These principles were given to us in a general kind of way by the Supreme Court of Canada, which elaborated on the principles that should go into the design of whether it's federal or provincial ridings or municipal wards. And there are really 5 basic principles that they elaborated on in a court case that's known as the Carter decision, which actually considered the design of ridings. But the general principles have been taken to be very influential in the shaping of the rules for how we approach things in Ontario ward boundaries. Of course, it's also governed by the Municipal Act to some degree too, but it leaves an awful lot of discretion. So the 5 principles are set out there. I've got a slide on each one. So in the interests of saving time for you to talk, I won't read them all at you. We'll just take them one by one. The first, and in many respects the most straightforward and probably the most obvious, is that ward population matters, and because it's really a democratic principle that votes should be more or less equal in weight. You'd like to think that one vote for one person has the same electoral power as one vote for another person. And so the equality of representation today is a big deal in assessing the workability of the current ward boundaries. The wards should be designed with relatively equal populations. If a ward is too small, then it has a disproportionate power as it comes to electing a member of council compared to a ward that's big, where a larger number of votes still only get to elect one person. So that's the principle about how they should be relatively equal. Now, always beware of lawyers on conference calls who talk about things being relatively equal, because you can say, well, just how relative is relative enough? And the court recognizes that some variation is inevitable. I mean, the fact is people keep coming and going all the time, and so you're never going to be able to get it to be perfect. And so the courts got over that a long time ago. But they also recognized that some degree of variation may actually be desirable. So not only do they tolerate it if we can't get it perfect, they may also encourage to not have it be, strictly speaking, driven by the math if, by deviating from perfect equality or relative equality, it helps to promote effective representation somehow, given the characteristics of the municipality. So you say, okay, well, how much of a deviation from equality, or more or less equal or relatively equal, is appropriate? And there is no hard and fast rule. It's kind of evolved over time, but in Ontario today, it's generally accepted that wards shouldn't vary from the average by more than plus or minus 25% in population, unless there's a good reason to do so. Well, in fact, if you had a good reason to do so, the courts would even let you go a little higher or a little lower than plus or minus 25. But they don't encourage that. All they would say is if it's necessary to achieve effective representation, then it's permissible to do so. And you can imagine, when you think about some of the vast territories that are covered in northern Canada, in coming up with a set of principles and rules about how to get ridings all equal in a country of our size, where there's such limited population in places like that, you can understand why they created that flexibility. The same flexibility applies in creating wards at a local municipal level. But I think when you have a relatively small municipality with a relatively even distribution of population, you better have a pretty good reason for deviating for plus or minus 25 that you can really point to and justify, having regard to the other factors, which I'm going to be describing through the rest of the presentation. The second is, it's not just equality of representation today, it's also tomorrow. And as I already mentioned, tomorrow means, over the period of now for the next 10 years. So we're not just designing them for today, we want them to last for a reasonable period of time. So the second factor to consider is how much growth will affect the balance of the ward sizes in the future. That's the second thing. The third thing is the means of communication and accessibility within the municipality. This considers how people get around within the municipality, factors like transportation. Say there's a lot of east-west corridors that people use. How they actually move around and access municipal services is quite relevant. In some communities, this is a huge thing. In very large wards, in geographically very large municipalities, it can be that sort of somebody on one end of the ward would be, say, totally oriented towards Ottawa, and somebody on the other side is more oriented towards like a regional center like Peterborough or Minden or something like that. I'm not giving a great example. In a place that you can drive from one end to the other relatively quickly, like Grimsby, this may not be such an important factor, but that's for you to tell me. It really comes down to how do these factors fit in your community. The fourth is pretty straightforward to understand. It's geographical and topographical features. So things like the natural features of the lake or the escarpment, which are two obviously significant factors in Grimsby's world, but also human-made things like highways or railway roads or like county or regional roads, or those things can be quite important too. And it's also important to think about how the different elements of the topography fit together. So there's the upper part of the escarpment and the lower part of the escarpment. Are they very different because some are above and some are below, or are they same because they're both engaged in thinking about the escarpment? We also want to think about, how things like railways and roads might create corridors that people naturally identify with as communities of interest, so that's another factor. But it focuses on the geographic features and then how those start to influence the way the community thinks and operates. And then finally is this sort of broad invitation to consider either community or diversity of interest. So the final piece of this is an examination of whether there are established or historic neighborhoods that should be respected in drawing ward boundaries. So that might be something like Grimsby Beach with its unique architecture and history. But it's also diversity of interest. So thinking about how to consider, say, a rural area and making sure that it continues to have an authentic and legitimate voice in a rapidly urbanizing community. Or we've also heard how common types of land ownership, like condominium dwellers or townhome dwellers, might have a sort of a unified type of interest in community compared to, say, people who are in single family dwelling type situations. So those are other ways people sometimes define community of interest. So those are the factors that the court would urge us to consider, and they are very much reflected in the terms of reference that were given to us by the council that said that we should consider these things as set out here. These are, when we're thinking about how we evaluate the different ward options that you see, it'd be useful if you could have these questions in the back of your mind. The relatively equal population today, how those populations will look in 2026 and 2030. There's no magic to 2026, that's just the halfway point. Do they reflect or respect or take advantage of natural or human-built features? Do they respect existing communities? And then overall, do they deliver on the overall principles of effective representation? So I've been focusing a lot on the wards. I'm just about done the presentation part. I should just mention the existing council structure is still something that's a subject of this review as well. As you probably are aware, Grimsby's led by an elected council that consists of a mayor and 8 councillors who are elected every 4 years. So, mayor is elected at large, meaning that every eligible voter is entitled to cast a vote for that election. And there are 4 wards. Each ward has 2 councillors. And then Grimsby is also represented at Niagara Regional Council by the mayor and 1 regional councillor who we're very happy to have with us tonight. He's also elected at large. Grimsby's representation on Niagara Regional Council, though, is not part of this review, and we will not be making any comments on it. We're just focusing on Grimsby Council. Here are the existing wards. You can see in the description of the existing wards for population that Grimsby has a calculated current population of about 31,000. And based on the projections, it's projected to go up to around 31.7 in 2022, 34, just up to 34.1, give or take, in 2026, and up around 36,000 or so in 2030. And these reflect the near-term calculations for, say, 2022 reflect the state of applications that were known to the city basically as of about January when these were calculated. So things that were known live applications in January went into the baseline, and then the projections include a combination of sort of lands that are zoned residential and sort of a pace of absorption that the marketplace has been taking. It also takes into consideration the planned rate of growth and the city's estimates under its official plan. So the calculations going out to 2030 have a number of different inputs into them, ranging from specific applications that are known and estimates of how long they would take, as well as the sort of the overall growth of pace, because some of the things that might be realized by 2030 may not yet be contemplated by now. But as the court recognizes, what's important is that you anchor it in the reality of today, and you do your best, having regard to all the sorts of factors I identified, to calculate your estimates for the future. But of course, estimates are just that, and that's an inherent limitation of the process. Forecasting is just that, forecasting. And in population, as in weather, it's frequently correct, but sometimes isn't. So that's just something we have to work through as a limitation of the process. So just a quick sort of fast forward then to where we are right now in the process. I mentioned that we had done a draft report that captured the feedback from phase 1. So 6 draft ward boundary options have been prepared for your consideration, and this is what we're here to get your feedback on today. We got some guidance from council as a result of our first report. So the first was in regard to the method of election. We reached the conclusion, and we sought guidance from council, and it was we were directed that we would no longer consider the at-large to be an option. So we basically proceeded on the basis that there would still be wards. In regard to council size, it was our sense, based on the consultation so far, that it did not appear that it was ready to make, the council would be ready, based on what we'd heard so far, to make a decision as to a council size of 7 or a council size of 9. But we did rule out options of going either lower or higher, lower than 7 or higher than 9. And so what we'll see is that we're going to be presenting options that would be appropriate to support either a council of 9 or of 7. The other direction that we saw at the last meeting was we felt it was premature to foreclose the conversation as to whether the best configuration would still be 1 per ward or 2 per ward. Frankly, there was a lot of divided opinion on that, and we thought that council and the public would benefit from being able to see how different executions of draft ward boundaries might work with either 1 per or 2 per. And so you'll see that we'll present some that are designed to have 1 councillor per ward, and some that are designed to have 2 per ward. We sought direction at that time, as it's permissible to have uneven numbers of wards. So, you could have 3, 2, and 1 and 1, for example. That would be permissible, but it was not considered desirable. And so we were given the option to present options as that, if they were necessary in order to make the math work. But as you'll see, there are a number of options that appeared to deliver successful mathematical outcomes without having to move to a unequal type of representation by ward. And so we haven't presented any unequal ones, but we haven't, strictly speaking, ruled it out of the process. So there's still definitely by ward, still considering options of either 7 or 9, and still considering options of 1 or 2 per ward. And that narrowed the number of permutations down significantly, but still left a large number of options for consideration. And so these next slides are designed to just show you, and I'll present each one of these options to you. But what you'll see is, if there are 4 options that would keep a council of 9, and there are 2 options that would deliver a council of 7. So you'll see that so you could organize them that way. There are also, on the number of councillors per ward, there's 3 that are designed to elect 1 per ward, and there's 3 that are designed to elect 2 per ward. And then in regard to the number of wards, there's 1 that's an 8 option. There are 2 that are 6 ward options, and there are 3 that are 4 ward options. So that's how they kind of shake out. And then the other big difference is, in the early rounds of consultation, we were urged to consider what we sort of refer to as options that, they were designed to respect diversity of interest, or that was what the motive behind them was. And they yielded these sort of either, rainbow flag or layer cake like orientations where it was considered a design feature to go from the lake all the way up to Mud Street. And so there are two that reflect that kind of orientation that are available for people to try on for size. There's four that were not designed with that in mind at all. They were more designed to respect the sort of east-west orientation that were more reflective of the history of the municipality and the patterns of living within it. And you can have a look at these ones as well and see whether you think that they're more reflective of how the place lives or works. And there's some, very significant features that you have to try to work around. I mean, one is the escarpment and thinking about how to manage the representation of the escarpment communities. Another is, the lakefront and whether it makes more sense to have communities on both sides of the QEW or neighborhoods on both sides of the QEW represented in wards, or whether the QEW or the railway tracks make more sense as a boundary. So we've tried on a few different options for size for you. Some are designed to cut across the QEW, others are designed to respect the QEW. And of course, the other problem is a lot of the growth is stacked in very confined spaces within the municipality. So one of the other things you can't kind of get around is the effect of the intensification that's going to be happening in and around the Casablanca area. And I think you're all aware of that high rate of growth. And so what that does is it puts a significant numeric burden on that area that needs to be managed in any one of these options. And in a lot of cases, you can kind of look at the options holistically and sort of see how, oh, I get it. This is what they were trying to manage to control the changes there. So again, I've just repeated here keep it a little closer to you in case you're looking at this version at home, the scorecard, like the various questions that you'd ask. Now, what I can do is just sort of quickly take you on a tour of each one of these options. They all have relatively acceptable mathematical outcomes. Insofar as they respect not being more than plus or minus 25. And, every one of them could be tweaked to some degree or another. So the first option is to reflect a 8-ward model, 1 councillor per ward. That would keep the current size, but go from the current 2 per into a 1 per. It's designed to try and aggregate enough people in Ward 8 so that it has a significant a large enough population to be to fall within the range. If you look at the 2022 numbers, you can see Ward 6, which is this one over here. Look how Ward 6 starts at minus 22, and look how it swings to plus 20. This gives you a strong sense of just how much growth is going. And that you're going to find that that's one of the distorting factors that because there's so many people packed into such a small place. That's one of the areas that's just kind of tricky, because as you can see from the design of Ward 6, if you can start off at minus 22, and if you have that one little sliver of the municipality, you'll wind up at plus 20 and be the largest over the 10-year period. So that's one of the things that's got to be managed no matter what. So in this one, you can see we were trying to work with the QEW there and trying to sort of have the ward boundaries that run that way, right, like east-west. What I'll do is I'll just take you through all of them, and then we'll come back to the beginning and I can get your comments on them. The ward boundary option number 2, this is a 6-ward for a 7-member of council. And as you can see, it still has a ward that represents the escarpment. You can see it starts about being on par, and over time it shrinks. And one of the messages you can take from that is that there's just not a lot of growth planned for up here. And you can see how Ward 5 starts at 0 and it grows to plus 6. And then Ward 4, not surprising, given what I told you about this piece right here, is going to start at minus 13 and it's going to go to plus 15. And you can see Ward 1 and Ward 2, and you can get a sense of their growth. You can see how Ward 1 in particular doesn't have a lot of growth slated there for it, because it tends to fall over the life of the 10 years. You can see how Ward 3 loses a little bit of ground, so does Ward 2. So this one is actually, again, when you combine the two, they start to get useful in getting you to see where the growth is concentrated. Ward boundary option number 3. This is the first of the layer cake options. It's 6 wards for 7 councillors. You know, if I were doing a sales job on this for this one, what I'd say is, if you believe that having each of the wards have a broad swath of the municipality within it, then you might think that that's a real good way to bridge over the differences as among the different segments of the community. I would just point out that if I were not being a salesperson for it, you can see that this entire area is only sufficient to get ourselves up to sort of 1 ward's worth of people. And so you could conclude from that that the majority of the residents in every one of these wards, when drawn this way, would be heavily torqued down to the lakeside of the community, and, you know, particularly here, but all these parts. And so, you know, that's obviously a weakness of it, but we were asked to model this to see what it would look like, to see whether it was doable. And look, there's a couple of protrusions or incursions or whatever from Ward 4 into Ward 3 here. For baseline modeling purposes, we could probably, like, if somebody liked this, but they said, I just hate that expansion of 4 into 3, then, you know what, we could probably play with those to sort of smooth some of them out. But this was a model that was trying to get to relatively favorable mathematics and just kind of model what this would look like. And of course, the reason why the Ward 1 here was to try and maintain the integrity of Grimsby Beach and have the numbers work. Just about done, and then we can open the floor. This is a 4-ward option, so 2 per ward. This is sort of designed to be a modification of what you've got now. If I can just sort of show you by comparison, just keep your eye on Ward 4 here for a second. So by comparison, that's your current Ward 4. It goes up onto the escarpment. This would be different in that regard. Keep your eye here on Ward 2. You can see that there's this sort of puzzle piece alignment that's going on here. So let me shoot back and show you the comparison. And I'll try not to make anybody car sick from jumping around too much. You can see that clears up some of the puzzle piece behaviors that were going on. It tries to create one kind of reasonably focused Ward 3. It tries to create one reasonably focused Ward 1. You know, we've had some commentary about maybe adjusting this, potentially shifting, you know, some of the boundaries in and around this area. And, you know, we're certainly happy to hear any comments along those lines. You can see also that this one, it goes from -4 to +23. That's Ward 4. So that's got quite a swing of increase. You can see that Ward 3 is going from -4 to -14. So you really get a sense of just how little new growth is anticipated here. And Ward 1 from +9 to 0. So again, relatively, you know, some from 8,701 to 9,044. And, you know, like if someone were to come along and introduce a new proposal to rezone some land and convert something that's currently not residential to make it residential, then you can get a sense of what a swing of a few hundred residents might mean to some of these things. Because it's important to bear in mind that the average ward here is, you know, in this case, it's just under 8,000. In this case, it's 8,500. And in this case, it's 9,000. So an extra 300 or 400 people doesn't matter. And so, you know, particularly when we're thinking about 10 years out, you know, whether it's +23 or whether it's +25, you know, is that going to be accurate to the nearest 100 or is that going to be accurate to the nearest 300? Well, to some degree, that depends a little bit on the Ontario Municipal Board or wherever we're calling it by then and the initiative of different landowners. So, you know, there's a lot of factors to consider here, but the idea is to get the fundamentals right and then attack any of the irritants. So I promise I am now truly just about done. This is number 5. I guess what's quite different about this one is it makes Ward 1 longer and it uses the QEW as the boundary. kind of in recognition that functionally, so this would be kind of focusing on physical barriers and patterns of communication where people kind of move and walk and participate in the community. This one chooses this particular chunk of terrain to try and get some extra population into Ward 3. There would be other opportunities or other options there, but as you can see in this case, the issue with Ward 4 is that it starts at -24 and it goes to +5. We could probably do some further adjustments as between Ward 3 and Ward 4 to try and balance this out a little bit. Like we would have some room to play here in order to fix things if there were more advantageous places to put boundaries in this space. And actually, frankly, because these are relatively equal, we're not doing too badly here, which means we could make some adjustments. We just have to have regard to Ward 4 and where it starts and make sure that it doesn't start off underweighted. And then finally, this is the 4-ward version of the layer cake. And as you can see, it has relatively good numeric outcomes. I mean, +18, -15, that's not too bad. This has sort of one puzzle piece here, which is necessary to make sure that Ward 1 has enough population, but you could probably jig with that a little bit too. So I hope by my comments, you're sort of getting a sense that there's a lot that's still flexible here. What we're really looking for is the strategic guidance in what's on the right track and what's on the wrong track. And we can let the detailed GIS analysis and the detailed population analysis kind of sort out where to, how to move things. So what I'd like to do is invite any of the members of the public. I think perhaps if we start on Ward 1, and what we'll do is we'll go through each of them. I'd be very happy to take your comments and whether you think it's on like the right track or the wrong track, or if there are ways that could improve it. Perhaps I can open the floor to whatever comments you might have, and you can signal with the little, either the raise hand device, or you can go like this, or whatever, frankly, whatever's convenient to you. Does anybody want to start? Carol, I see you've got your hand raised.
I do, thank you. I like many of your options. The layer cakes, option 3 and 6, seem to have a diversity of population in those very vertical lines. And if a counselor, and one of them has 1 counselor per ward, I believe, and 6 has 2 counselors per ward. Is it easy for a counselor to understand the diverse needs of someone at the lake versus someone up on the ridge near Mud Street?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that you've put your finger on 2 factors. I think there's lots of counselors on the line, and tonight's about hearing from the public, and because the council will have entire meetings that are dedicated to hearing from them. I think there's a huge amount of human empathy that can allow a counselor to represent people from extraordinarily diverse areas and backgrounds. And geography is one thing, but there's all sorts of other diversities and equities and inclusions to consider, other than living on Mud Street or living down by the lake, and everything from racial diversity and ethnic diversity and all that kind of thing. I think this system of wards can't tell you who to elect to have empathy. What it's got to do is make sure that it doesn't come up with like goofy errors in terms of either math or just putting together things that don't make any sense. But I think humans are always capable of being able to represent and understand. The question is always whether they do or not. And this is about the physicality and the math and the patterns, and the people, of course, will always be the thing that will make it either a great success or defeat its success. So the other thing, though, that you put your finger on is one specific aspect that people say as well. In an era of politics where some politicians focus on their core, if you were to pick on Ward 6, you could say, well, the people who were from down here, elected from down here, they might not ever care about what's going on in here. And it is sometimes said that having 2 councillors per ward means that it's always worth representing everybody, because if you do and the other guy doesn't, then you've got a leg up. And so it's sometimes said that the risk of having people not be broadly representative because of geography is partially offset by a 2 per ward model. But that's about all I can tell you, because it ultimately comes down to how councillors choose to be empathetic and listen and be engaged, and that's beyond the scope of a ward boundary structure. Hope that is a fair attempt to answer your question.
The question really was, and thank you very much for that. The question really was about the length of the, and you addressed that. And I don't think that any counselor isn't empathetic, but the issues would be different in an area of dense population and possibly urban dwellers going to jobs in Toronto or wherever, and the rural community issues of around farming and whatever. So that my issues, my diversity issues, were not about race or creed or anything else. They were about the issues that would be predominant in an urban setting versus a rural setting. Thank you.
Who else would like to go? Take you back to 1. Just, is there any specific comments about this question of if you were going to use QEW? Does the QEW feel, and you see this showing up in option 1, you see it showing up in option 4, you see it showing up in option 5. Does the QEW feel like a good thing to use as a barrier, or does it feel like a good thing to cut across? Howard, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I strongly support using the QEW as a boundary. It's become very much a realistic division between the areas of the town. There's a different community that lives north of QEW and a different community that lives south. I prefer the actually, when going back to option 1, of all the options, that's the one I prefer, but I'd like to see the QEW continue on as a formal boundary between the, right where the red circle is. I would like all the wards to be north or south of the QEW, but I think the option 1 is the one that I prefer. It. I've lived here for a while in Grimsby, and I've come to appreciate the differences between the people that live close to the lake and the people that live south of the QEW. There's definitely a difference, and I like the separation of the ward on the escarpment, because they have very different issues and concerns than I think most people that live at the bottom of the escarpment. So again, I think option 1 is the one that I would favor, with the modifications that I've indicated.
And I just wonder, before you move on, because I quite appreciated your comments last time when you came. I just wondered, with respect to 5, is the reason for your preference with, like, this has some of the same design features, and is it just that you prefer the 1 per ward model? Yes,
I strongly am in favor of 1 ward, 1 representation. A number of municipalities over the years, like Toronto, many years ago, did have 2 members. Before it was amalgamated, it had 2 members per ward, and the infighting, the power plays that went on there were notorious at times. And I think the 1 ward, 1 councillor is the way to go.
Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you.
Well, yes, I guess Councillor Furtick, you're here in your capacity as a citizen as opposed to a regent, so why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, but I'd like to hear everybody else's comments because I got another sort of a different perspective as to what's being presented. I have to fully agree with Mr. Levine, except that I do like option 5. And if you take a look at the population, even from 2022 to 30, they're very close. I guess my question to you, Mr. Matheson, is that are these population numbers, do they follow in with what the region is expecting in 2030?
That's a great question. As far as we know, they do. We actually were just confirming with town planning staff about that yesterday. They indicated to us that as far as they knew, that it was pretty much on the same lines as what the region was saying. So yeah, thank you.
I sort of thought, Mr. Matheson, that the numbers were about 8% on the high side. And the reason I say that is that when you look at 2022, I don't know where that number's come from, but that certainly isn't where we're at in 2021. I believe we were at 28.5 or 28.9. So there, anyway, that makes a little bit of a difference, particularly when you're looking at Ward 4. But I do like your option 5, and I do like the Ward 3 as being the entire portion and part of the escarpment. And the reason I say this, and I'll go back to 1997, 1998, when I was originally on council, that the people from the escarpment really wanted to have somebody that represented themselves. And, you know, this is very good that you've sort of drawn that out. I don't know about your little circle down there at the bottom of the, you know, around Ward 4 and 3, but I would keep everything as much as you could above the escarpment. And 2 councillors, I like 8 councillors plus the mayor. The only thing that I will comment on, maybe I should let somebody else get into it, because I do have 3 or 4 questions I'd like to ask, and unless you want me to ask them now.
No, why don't we spread it around a bit, because it'll make for a better conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I can jump in on the population question, John.
Let's do that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Olivia.
For 2020, our population estimate is around 30,000, just over, which actually lined up pretty good with what planning staff had based on census data. But then the way we've done it is it's based on property boundaries, and then using the residential codes to estimate the number of people within each property, with each type of residential property. And we did a couple different things to test that, including using census data and adding water metering data to that. And we did a couple different calculations to kind of validate the numbers that we're using here in terms of how they've accurately predicted 2020 population. And then we use, planning applications to project into the future.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, it's a crying shame that we were doing this at year 4.5 into a 5-year census, because we're going to get the census data, precisely 6 months too late to know exactly what it is. So we're working on calculations, and like Olivia was saying, there's all sorts of inputs that go into them, and ultimately a lot of it relies on estimates that come out of census data around number of people per unit, and the size of households and that kind of thing. So it could be that if we were to take the way you were calculating it and then the way we were looking at it and the additional data sources that we have, it could be that we'd be able to we'd find that there wasn't as much difference as you might think, but ours might actually be a little bit more accurate because of the amount of effort that we have to put into it to get to an estimate based on using all these other data sources. But it's sort of striking. You'd think that one thing that every municipality would know is how many people live in it at any moment in time. but that's actually not the case. It's a number that has to be calculated, and the further that you get from the census, the more complicated it gets. But anyway, really appreciate your questions. Carol, I see you have a question.
I do, thank you. I would like to understand how this will be decided. Is it to be decided by council itself, or is it to
Yes.
be decided by a referendum?
No, it's under the Municipal Act, it's a decision of council.
And thank you. The other thing I would like to say is I agree with Mr. Levine, and I like option 1 for many reasons that he's already stated.
I'm just curious, is there any way we could improve it? Is there any, like, I'm always interested in anything that looks like a puzzle piece. Is there anything about it that you would have said, well, I wanted to say I liked it, and I'm holding my nose about this one little piece of it? Because I'm quite sincere that we're very happy to, do tweaks to improve things.
Well, I've seen that you've done it as a mathematician, and I appreciate that because I'm one. It does look a little bit awkward to have that blue piece in Ward 6. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yes, I know. I'm wondering in your projections, whether you think that little piece of blue that's sticking out into Ward 4 might be offset by more population than you're anticipating in the red circle.
Yeah, that's a nice question. Yeah.
It might offset if our projections are a little bit off, and you might have more in the red circle than you are anticipating.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look,
So
that's a
I will
good thing.
say that little red circle we have, it's one of the few places we do have a pretty accurate estimate of the population that's coming into the red circle, just because that's a single development, and we know it's going to be around 2,000 people going on that side of the campaign.
Olivia, you're fading in and out when you speak.
I'm sorry. Is this a little better?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
I was just gonna say we have a quite the population increase of about 2,000 in the red circle is one of the better estimates we have, because it's a single development we're anticipating around 2,000 additional people going into the population there. The other little puzzle piece worth pointing out, although it still doesn't make pretty lines, is that some of these wonky lines are because we use property lines or the back of a property line as opposed to a street. So what's happening there is actually a lot of the neighborhood streets inside Casablanca would be in the blue ward, and then a couple of the houses that are on Main Street, either side of Main Street, would remain in Ward 4. So it's a little cleaner when you think of it that way, but certainly doesn't look nice on the map still. The point is well taken. And that also explains that little projection in Ward 2. It's also a funny property boundary, a property line.
Thanks, Olivia. And even having said that, I still like option 1, despite its little pieces of puzzle. I think it works well.
Thanks. Other comments? Deborah.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I guess one of the questions that I had was, how does a restructuring, whichever it is, help us to eliminate the current 5-3 gridlock that we continuously see amongst our council members?
Well, it's a good question. I would say the quick answer is it doesn't. Because the purpose of this is to address the mathematical inequalities that currently exist in the wards. It's not within my terms of reference to comment on the performance of any aspect of council, and so I won't. I'd merely say that's what you do at the ballot box with your wards. The purpose of the wards is to come up with stuff that makes sense based on the ability to deliver representation. From a point of view of the 5 factors that are considered by the court. But it's a good and legitimate question, but it's something that can't really be fixed by a ward boundary review. I suppose it could be made worse Because if we were
Right.
to set up a structural conflict, and where you sometimes see this is in communities that say have a high number of seasonal property owners who may consider themselves at odds with the permanent property owners. So it is possible to exacerbate that by, say, creating an equal number of wards that, half are on one side and half are on the other. But that's a different matter than you'd face here in managing Grimsby.
And then my other question is around how do we get to a number? How do we how does a municipality say to itself, are there any rules around you have to have this many counselors per population? Because when I look at, Hamilton, and you've got, 600,000 people, 15 counselors. So that means one counselor is representing 40,000 people. So how does a municipality our size have such a high proportion? Currently, that would work out to about 7,000 people per counselor.
So that's a really good question. And I feel like you're a little bit like somebody who started watching Game of Thrones in season 2. Because back in season 1, we dealt with that whole question of council size. And what I can tell you is if you grab that first report that we wrote, we addressed it extensively. But the quick summary of what happened back in season 1 was under the Municipal Act, council can set their own size. You have to have at least 5, and that would be a mayor plus 4. We put together a list of I think we picked 30 municipalities that were plus or minus on the list of Ontario municipalities that were either a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than Grimsby. And what it showed was, I think about 2/3 of them had either councils of 7 or 9. It's comparatively rare to go as low as 5 because frankly, there's a lot of work for 5. And it's generally considered not a great idea to have an even number. I think perhaps for the reason you were already hinting at in your first question. And so if you're going to go odd, you can go as low as 5, but then you're really in trouble either if someone takes ill or just from a workload point of view. The 7 is quite common, 9 is quite common. And when you get over 9, that becomes increasingly less common as well. So 7 to 9, I think you'd say are well within the normal bounds. And the other thing that you have to take into consideration is whether it's a full-time position or whether it's a part-time position. And so when you're thinking about Hamilton or when you're thinking about Toronto and Mississauga, those would be full-time counselors as opposed to part-time. But it's a great question.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Clearly, I missed the season 1. I'm in the season 2.
Yeah. Well, just wait till season 3. It's going to be even more interesting, and I'm going to feel sorry for the people who missed all these meetings along the way.
Yeah, and so just to that point, then, in terms of preference of options, just myself looking at it, I like the I guess it was option 6.
Yeah, I'll call it up for you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
That one?
Yeah, option 6. Just because I know that I think Carol had touched on this as well, but just sort of the differences between, and I wonder if maybe that is a good way of, we talk about diversity and everything, that when you do understand the other person's position, so if you're on the lake and you're sort of made to understand what's happening up on the escarpment and everything, so this cuts a nice swath across from the lake to the escarpment, and that each ward would have to sort of, think about all aspects of, from the lake to the escarpment. And so, my thinking, and I looked at all this, was that would be a nice viewpoint for counselors to have, which is, a lot broader, a lot more diverse, and, and that they might, have to work together a little better because now they have that greater diversity to work with.
Jeff's iPad.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, John. This is Kristen Hansen sitting next to Jeff, my husband.
Okay.
Hi. I think this report really reflects the input that those of us who attended the first round of sessions gave, so kudos on that. I'm also favoring option 1, but I was wondering, it looks like option 1 is for a 9-member council. Was there an option 1 style for a 7-member council that was examined?
Let me think. Olivia, have we got one that's more like this for 7?
Yeah, I would say it's option 2 would be the closest of a
Yeah.
war of a escarpment boundary, and then looking at some other ones, and there are certainly more permutations of this that we could look at.
Yeah, so for example, we could slice them this way using the QEW instead of this way cutting across the QEW. Like honestly,
Yeah, 'cause,
it's bad enough showing you 6, and we thought you'd just get mad at us if we showed you 15 options. So.
you're probably right. But I agree with what Mr. Levine was saying earlier, is the QEW is such a significant feature in Grimsby. I think people feel like they live north or south of it.
I'm just going to
And
make the note, this would be a superior option if we use the QEW.
as a dividing line.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't favor the rainbow layer cake options. I understand the intent that they're, each counselor would need to represent a very diverse population, but I would be afraid human nature would be to campaign in one condo building and you've got the ward and don't have to go ever, up north of Park Road.
The whole thread of focusing on your core roads.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, like we can certainly, if we see that there's energy for the 6 wards and the kind of the QEW thing, then we can bang together one. I think, you can see from this that there'd be a way to make it work. Wes.
Yes, how are you, John?
Good, thanks.
Good. I'm another citizen who's joined in on season number 2. However, I did do a little background homework, some Cole's Notes versions for season 1, so I gathered a little history on this topic. So just as an average, ordinary citizen, I think I would throw my opinion in along with a couple others who have spoken and say I do like the QE as a dividing line. I've lived here since '97. I'm a business owner here in town. I think I'll go in line with, I don't know if it was Harry who mentioned it, but someone mentioned 1 counselor per ward. I'm a fan of that as well. In a perfect world, we can have 2 counselors work together in 1 ward, but I think in reality that's not always the case. So I think I'm a fan of the 6 ward option and having 1 counselor per ward and having the QE as a distinctive dividing line between the wards. And I also like the fact that the escarpment is its own distinct ward as well. So I know there's some puzzle pieces to play with. They can get massaged. I myself am in Ward 1. But yeah, if somehow those parameters were to guide the decision moving forward, I think that would be suitable in my opinion. But yeah, I think there's great points spoken by pretty much everybody tonight.
Honestly, that's the way it's been. Oh, getting some bad feedback here. I was just saying, obviously, honestly, that's the way it's been every meeting. Every meeting's had great feedback. So I guess we'd sort of then we'd be looking at reconfiguring this one so the QEW is more the boundary, and it'd have more the flavor of 1 or of 5 in the sense of where the lines are going, but we'd set it up so that it has 6.
Yeah, agreed. All right, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
You're
Other comments?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to jump in and say, for me, I just am under the impression that a 7-member council is generally more efficient or maybe more effective. So I too like option number 2. And I like that it gives Ward 6 a strong united voice, the mountain and escarpment. If there was a thought to redivide this option by the QEW, and I can understand that thought, I would still like to see the north and south sides of Main Street East and Main Street West remain connected, because I've noticed in some of the options that the north and south sides of Main Street East and Main Street West in some parts are divided. And I just think those two sides of the street, both east and west, are very much, should be connected. They share much in common. So
That's
that was
great.
my thought.
So 7 wards, and if we're going to reconsider it, make sure that we keep Main Street East and West, north and south sides connected.
Yes, yes. And I personally, I don't even mind if Ward 6 has, you know, a lower population compared to its representation. So, you know, a negative variance from the average, because they do have such a unique flavor versus so much of the under the escarpment areas, where I think whether we're north or south of the QEW, we still seem to share many goals, is my impression.
Thanks. And what you just said would be a very nice example of when the courts would be tolerant of deviating from the ideal variances to give, like, so that's something where if you said we're doing this deliberately, not because we couldn't be bothered doing the math or not because we couldn't be bothered getting it right, as a means of ensuring that we didn't accidentally, or, you know, just to make up the math, throw the wrong people in with Ward 6, because they deserve effective representation too.
Yes.
It's not like you're 6 people out for lunch, all with $20 bills trying to make change. You know?
No.
That's sometimes what it feels like.
Yeah.
Trying to come up with a tip when there's nobody's got any small bills.
Yes. It's like option 5. The only thing I noticed about option 5 was that the subdivisions under the escarpment are also included with Ward 3. Mm-hmm. And again, that's fine if it helps with the numbers, the division, but I'm just thinking that those subdivisions have very different concerns than the rural areas on the above the escarpment.
I'm just going to make sure I get that.
But for me, the 6 councillors, 1 mayor is very important, that we get to a more effective, efficient council.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Other comments? Councillor Furtick, you had a couple that you were holding, and I think we could come back with one to you, I think. And then I'll get to you next, Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Matheson. I'm sort of changed my mind. I like the ward number 5. I like that option. The only thing I don't like is what the lady, is that Mrs. Brooks, that was just talking about below the escarpment, those subdivisions there. It's too bad you couldn't configure that around a little bit in order to give Ward 3 its unity. I mean, I like that. And I certainly like Mr. Levine's point about making the QEW a boundary. So however you got to split up the numbers, that's kind of nice. Having said that, the only thing I'm a little disappointed in is that the entire presentations all along have not included the regional councillor, and I'll tell you why. I don't believe that we are going to continue very many years where the province is not going to come down to us and say, hey, guys, you better start cutting the number of politicians in the Niagara Peninsula. And I'll give you one example. We just had a meeting the other day at the Community Services. The city of Niagara Falls, which has 3 regional councillors that sit on regional council, the Niagara Falls has given a unanimous decision to suggest that the regional councillors do double duty. So therefore, not only would you be sitting on local council, but you'd also be sitting on the regional council. So what that does is that eliminates 3 positions out of Niagara Falls. St. Catharines has got 6. A total of 30 at the region, of which 18 are regional councillors. I believe, and I have a strong feeling, that Mr. Ford is going to come down and say, Niagara, you better cut. And I can see 18 councillors be cut. And I can also see the possibility, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think there's a possibility that they would be ending up doing double duty. So I guess that's my only disappointment in the entire study that you're doing. And I've also suggested, I think I talked to you or your staff that I suggested that as well. But anyway, that's if that's the route you're going to go, then that's fine. I just want to express my opinion. That's all.
Oh yeah, no, it's a legitimate opinion. It's just the terms of reference didn't allow us to consider the regional council.
Yeah, and I can understand that. The council's directed you in a certain area and a certain way to go. Then I appreciate that. I appreciate that. The status quo that we do have, if you get into option number 1, where you've got 8 wards, do you know how confusing that's going to make the public? The public has a hard time now with 4 wards. I can't imagine being on council and the people that are going to call me and ask me what ward I'm in. Now you're chopping the whole municipality up into 8 wards. Sorry, I don't like that. I'm not a fan of that. I can understand some of the feeling of, using the QEW as a boundary. I can understand all those little things. That's good. But I don't understand the number of wards. And I don't understand, if you had 8 wards, why you'd want to have 1 councillor in each ward. Anyway, that's just my opinion. And as I say, I think the best is number 5, which you have 4 or 5 wards or whatever it is. And it's closer to the status quo. Because once Mr. Lozani puts his development in on the north side of the QEW, there's nothing left. So if you can juggle those numbers around between 3, 4, and try and give the escarpment their own councillor or councillors, I think you got a winner. That's just my opinion. And thank you for allowing me to have some input. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Carol, you've had your hand up for a while.
I have, thanks. Well, I started to talk about the 1 councillor option and why, but I'd just like to say that if we're going to consider option 5, we're really back to what we have now. And I think there's a whole appetite for people in Grimsby for something different that makes some sense and that they have some power in the council. So I'm not confused about 8 wards, and I doubt that many people would be. It's very easy to find out who your councillor is by just going to Grimsby town, and you can find that out. But what I really wanted to say was in support of one counselor per ward, in any kind of business venture, one person accountability to any particular responsibility. One person accountability says you're accountable to those people, rather than what we might have now or could happen when we have two, there may be a conflict within the ward itself. So I'm a proponent of one counselor per ward, and I very much like either options 1 or 2. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. We still have about another 10 or 12 minutes, so I'd be very happy to hear any other comments. Deborah.
Yeah, so as I'm listening to all this and, you know, sort of now I'm kind of leaning towards that option 1. But what I would be curious about is, I don't know if Wayne is allowed to answer this, but what is the concern with having one counselor per ward?
Thanks for the question, but I think what would happen if that alderman didn't work for you? What would happen if he neglected his duties and didn't work for you? I guess that's my concern in having one alderman per ward. Look at the situation that we have today. We have signs all over that says that, and I don't want to get into the debate of it. And whether
and I got to say, Councillor, we shouldn't get into anything too specific about.
no, I won't. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that at least with 2 councillors, you've got somebody that you can converse with in the ward, because even as long as like I spent 13 years on Grimsby, 4 terms, and I was in Ward 2 all the time. I always had somebody beside me. I had Dave Cadwell beside me, or I had Wendy Watt beside me. When you have 2 of you team up together and you work together. So that's what I found. Anyway, I think it's okay to have one word. Let's just hope the heck that he's going to work for you, because if he doesn't, let's hope the province comes in with the regulations to get rid of him, because otherwise you're stuck with him for 4 years. That's just my comment. Sorry.
No, thank you.
And is that did I answer your question?
Yes, you absolutely did. Thank you, Wayne.
Oh, you're welcome.
Wes.
Thanks, John. Just a really quick question. Option number 2, if you go back to that, was that 6 councillors?
Yeah.
Or
That's
because
right.
there was just talk now about 8 being too many, and I do agree with that. I am a fan of one councillor per ward. I think whether you have 1 or 2 doesn't mean you're going to see eye to eye with 1 or 2 of them. But I thought that there's a few of us that were supportive of having 6 as opposed to 8. I do agree with Mr. Furtish. 8 seems like a bit much. But anyway, that's it. I just wanted to clarify whether 2 had 6. I see there it does.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Other comments? Howard, you look like you're about to say something.
I will make my comments. Thank you very much. I don't agree that less representation is better. And I think the province for the past many decades has been on a march to less and less municipal representation. And the end result, I don't think, is exactly what we wanted to see. The amalgamation in Hamilton and in Ottawa and certainly Toronto, I think resulted in poor representation, and it's allowed the bureaucrats to gain control to a large extent. The representation is really awful. And I think the fact that we're considering still having a good representation ratio in the town of Grimsby is a very positive thing. I think I'd like to see 8 councillors that are doing their job properly. And I think the end result will be better municipal government. I lived in Toronto for many years, and I remember distinctly the 2 members per ward, and there was so much fighting between the 2 that the constituents were ignored. There was much more energy expended in rivalry between the members than their actual duties. So I think the again, going back to the option 1, I do prefer it very much. I'd like to see the number of representatives, 8, continue. I think it's good, and I think there has to be an attempt by the people that live in this town to elect good representation and make sure that the town is going in the right direction. So I'm optimistic that option 1, I think, will be a good way to pursue this process. And thanks for your work. It's very interesting.
Thanks for your participation. Any other comments? Well, Mr. Mayor, I understand that no facilitator has ever been shot for ending a meeting 2 or 3 minutes early, but we have another couple of minutes if there's anything else anyone wants to say. I'm kind of at everyone's disposal.
Well, thank you very much, John, for quarterbacking a very successful meeting and finishing up even a little early. And I would just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and everyone who's joined us in the 4 meetings that we've had. And it's been a very interesting process, and I think it's certainly everyone who has taken part of it can be commended for looking to ensure that Grimsby's represented properly in whatever form for years to come. So thank you very much, John.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor.
everyone.
And can I just say, Olivia and I and the rest of the team hugely appreciate the input. And the one thing I'll guarantee you is that the various options that people have urged us to consider, or the various factors you've urged us to consider, that we're going to take every one of those away with us and make sure that if you read the footnotes carefully, or if you look at, watch the report, you'll be able to see us either say a really interesting point was made and this is why it might not work, or we'll say, boy, that was a really good idea, and so we changed this option to fix that puzzle piece or adjust that boundary. But I just want everybody to know that this is a meeting, and all of the other meetings and the survey, we will take extremely seriously in terms of weighing the inputs into the ultimate recommendations that we bring forward for council to decide on. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you very much, John and Olivia. And I really appreciate having Grimsby's future in your hands. So thank you very much. Have a good evening and good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.